Bloom, Kansas is situated right on busy highway, or I guess US 54, and that road goes straight west from Wichita for hours. And so it's even though you call it a ghost town now, it's situated right on a busy road. Once you get off the road and go into town, it's all dirt and gravel and old houses and a few structures that obviously have been here for a while, like the one behind me. I think this may have been a school. It also has labeled a church, certainly broken down and not used anymore. So it's Bloom was settled in the 1880s. A guy who moved here from Bloomsburg, Pennsylvania, named it Bloom because he was from Bloomsburg. And as the railroad kind of pushed through and would make normal stops here, it started dwindling through the Depression and the Dust Bowl era. And now it's just a collection of mostly just houses, like I said, and a couple other buildings. A couple pretty cool places to check out if you're into looking for historic and kind of abandoned old buildings. There's also right next to this is a homemade go-kart track, and I raced go-karts for a long time growing up, and so it looks like one that we would have on our farm. So kind of cool to see an old go-kart track here in Bloom, Kansas. There really isn't anything left of Lexington, Kansas anymore, and where I'm at is general vicinity of what it is. Obviously there's the sign behind me. I was out here looking around, there's really nothing, and a guy pulled up who lives here and told me that the town site is just a little bit west of here, but Hardin, the name Hardin is synonymous with the family that lives here and has lived here for a long time, and so they made this sign and designated kind of this is where the town was. Lexington, like a lot of towns, they had some resources here. They had water was plentiful. There was coal discovered a couple miles from here, and so people were investing in the town, hoping for the railroad. And that was a fairly common thing. And I've talked about railroads a lot in these towns, and people would invest in the town. They would build businesses. They would build homes, and they would try to persuade the railroad companies to build through their town. And in Lexington, they tried to do that, and the railroad did not come here. And then as soon as that happened, pretty quickly, there's you can't live here if there's not a railroad in the 1800s, and so you have to move on for survival. So people would move to nearby Ashland, which was a few miles south and west of here, and that was the demise of the town. And there's nothing left here. There is the gentleman that stopped told me there's a cemetery down the road, so we'll go check that out. And it's just a very beautiful part of rural southwestern Kansas. Talk about a rural pioneer type cemetery. It is very small. Most of the stones, don't even have dates on them, but there's only one. This one behind me is a fairly recent one. Everything else is from the, passed away in the late 1800s or maybe early 1900s. Sitka had a little more success than some of these other towns. They had a railroad near here. They had a really large stockyard, and so they had, even their reach went even into Oklahoma with some of the business that they did, and so the decline of Sitka to what it is today, which is very little, was a result of other towns kind of taking away, a little business here and there, and then in the 1950s, a huge fire wiped out, damaged most of the town, and I guess most of the important businesses. And back then, rural area, we were very far out in a rural area. Wooden structures caught fire, and there wasn't a fire department close, and so they were pretty much, they couldn't do much about that. And then, so they didn't really recover from that. And now today, all that's left, obviously, there's this grain elevator here that I think maybe is still getting some use, and then one or maybe one other structure. There's some foundations along the road. You can kind of walk right down the main street and see the sidewalk, and you can see where there were buildings off to the side, and it's pretty interesting to see where the town used to be. Our last stop for today here in Englewood, Kansas. We are only 4 miles north of the Oklahoma border. Very, very interesting history here. So, this was kind of a big city. This was as many as 2,000 people in the 1800s. It was, I guess, where it was situated, it just happened to be, along the railroad, and it was a good place, a good spot. And but one of the disadvantages it had is that it was only, like I said, 4 miles north of Oklahoma, and over the border in Oklahoma is what was called no man's land. I did a video previously on some towns in no man's land, and what that meant is there were no laws because Oklahoma was not a state yet. And even though Kansas had some law, right across the border there were none. So people were heading basically towards there, and they go through here and kind of looking to cause trouble. We're 50 miles south of Dodge City, notorious place for troublemakers back in the day, and they would head this way to go to Oklahoma, and this was kind of the last stop. And so maybe they couldn't fight the urge to wreak some havoc, and it happened here often. And even though there were some, you know, like a sheriff, sometimes they were overwhelmed by the amount of people that would come through here, and one sheriff could not keep the peace. So in no man's land in Oklahoma, a vigilante form of justice started happening. And every once in a while they would come up here to Englewood and they would try to keep the peace. And the stories are pretty crazy, pretty wild. I mean, you talk about the Wild West, this was it, where they would come up here, they would find somebody doing wrong, and they would hang him right here in the street, and they would bury him real quick. And that was kind of the way it was back then. And there were lots of gunfights. There's lots of stories of shootouts here, right here in Englewood. So the Depression years and the Dust Bowl and the drought times in the 30s and 40s really hurt Englewood, and the population declined and the businesses started going away, and it's a little bit out of the way now at this point. There's not a lot of main roads in this part of the state. So you can tell that it was a lot bigger because it's a sprawling area, and there's a lot of old houses. There's, you know, abandoned buildings everywhere. It is certainly a kind of ghost town hunter's dream. So it's certainly far down here in southwestern Kansas, but well worth the trip. Definitely obscure place, but kind of a neat little find here in Lexington. So it's a very, very kind of a neat place to find if you're near Lexington. There's also right next to this is a homemade go-kart track, and I raced go-karts for a long time growing up.